Just to introduce myself, my name is Tim Curran. Alongside me is Sam Levenger. And today we'll be going through workflow automations. So very excited to have you all on the room here. And so just to kind of give you guys a brief overview of what we'll be covering is, of course, workflow automations, one of our newest features. But we want to start kind of big picture, right? We're not going to be going through every little nook and cranny of the automations. We're going to be talking to some of the built think tank scheduled for later today, actually at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. So if you're wanting to dive deeper even more than what you get out of this training, by all means, we encourage that. So please join that think tank later today. And then also feel free to drop questions in the chat. Sam will be going through his presentation, speaking about what even workflows are, and then we'll jump into a product demo. But along the way in the chat, I'll be monitoring that. And please drop your questions in there. Real quick plug, though, other resources at your disposal. Don't forget about JobTread Connect. There is going to be a workflow automations lab at JobTread Connect. Again, JobTread Connect, January 14th through the 16th here in Dallas, Texas. We would love to see you there. I'll speak more about that at the end of today's training. And then also bear in mind the Facebook Pros group is a fantastic reference point for you all. That's where all of you whizzes are in the chat helping one another, because Sam knows his stuff, but if you're wanting to network with other builders and get their input, we have a bunch of users that are going to be on the think tank and that are already in that Facebook Pros group who definitely know automation. So with the housekeeping done, again, my name is Tim. I'm going to pass things along over to Sam now, who will be taking you through today's training. Take it away, Sam.
Thanks, Tim. Hey, everyone. My name is Sam Levenger. And go ahead and share my screen so y'all can see. All righty. Okay. Sweet. Okay. Awesome. So welcome, everyone, to JobTread 204, and that's going to be workflow automations. So getting started, already introduced myself. Let's just get into it. So first, obviously, we got to talk about what are workflows. So workflows, I like to think of them as the bridge between this trigger that we're going to set up and one or more actions in JobTread. And these actions are going to be predetermined actions that trigger, let's not say trigger since that's the other thing, actions that execute automatically after this predetermined trigger is set. Whoops. Sorry, 1 second there. Sorry, talking about that. Just as an example, once a customer order is approved, we can do something like update the custom status of a job. And that's actually going to be the example we'll use later on. So we'll just keep that in mind. Talking about some of the benefits of workflows, I like to think of them. The first thing that my mind kind of jumps to is what I think of as like these administrative and repetitive tasks. Those are great examples, and kind of just thinking of those small wins that we can jump to first. Those are great things to try to automate. It reduces that double entry. These workflows happen in real time, so you don't have to wonder like, hey, did this trigger or not? And then it just gives you less room for human error. Now let's talk about why someone would want to use workflows. So as y'all have gotten into JobTread, probably some of you a little longer than others, but hopefully you've seen that JobTread, we really give you this ability to customize JobTread around your needs rather than just kind of giving you this, shoehorning you into a one size fits all product. So really building on that kind of philosophy of tailoring JobTread to your needs, we now have workflows that you can use to even further tailor JobTread around your specific, workflow operations, things like that. So again, it really cuts down on those repetitive tasks, those what I like to call administrative tasks as well. And, just lets you get back some of that time, instead of spending every Friday at, 5 p.m. when you'd rather be going home, instead of doing, those checking all of your jobs, making sure they're in the right status, you could set up a workflow to do that automatically. So before we get into the workflows themselves, there's what I like to call step zero, and that's really defining your process first. So the need for this, it's really important because just first of all, you can't really automate your process if you don't have a defined process in place. So for instance, I've got on this screenshot here a job pipeline. And so, you have different statuses for your jobs. In this case, we've got new lead, discovery call, appointment scheduled, things like that. If you were to ask two different people in your organization, hey, what determines when a job goes from new lead to discovery call? Well, if they're giving you two different answers, then, you kind of need to work on step zero here of defining your process. Once everyone's in alignment, then you can start to automate. Otherwise, you're going to have two disagreements on, hey, well, this jumped to this status, but we didn't have this to trigger that. So before you get into that, it's important to go over this part. And just kind of talking about just generally looking at a job life cycle. This is just an example here where you would want to define your pre-sales, your estimates, execution, and billing and closeout. And then once you've kind of identified these bigger picture parts of your process, you can drill down into, the more specific. I have an industrial engineering background, so I love these kind of organizational charts and swim lanes and things like that. I know it's probably not the most fun to other people, but this is really a great thing to do if you haven't done it already, just as kind of an exercise of, hey, let's write down what is our actual process. And then from here, I can kind of drill down and say, hey, maybe schedule a site visit under lead communication. Maybe that's a part of this where I can start automating that. When one thing happens in JobTread, I want to schedule this site visit and communicate with the customer. So this is just to kind of get your brain, get the gears turning as far as how to decide what you even want to automate. The last thing you want to do is just start building out workflows, but not even have a process in place, because that's, you're going to end up with things that people are not expecting, more or less. So going on from there, let's talk about workflows, just how they work now. So some of the common terms you're going to hear me talk about are triggers, actions, filters, and paths. That's certainly not an all-inclusive list, but these are the ones that you're going to see the most often here, and figured they're worth going over in more detail. And then just if you take a look at the screenshot here, just want to point out, this is a simple 3-step workflow that I've created here. And really, we'll talk more about some of the limits of how many workflows we can build out, how many actions they can have, things like that. But I just wanted to showcase here, this is a fully built out workflow, and it's super powerful, and it's only 3 steps. So don't feel like you need to swing for the fences and hit, any of these maximums before the point is, start small, figure out these small wins that you can get a lot of value from. And then, that's a great way to just learn workflows in general. So talking about triggers, I like to think of it as kind of the starting gun for a race. You're waiting for this preset event to happen. In this case, if we look at the trigger I have, it's document updated. And so what that means is I'm sitting around waiting for a document to get updated. And then once I see that, I'll take that data and then pass it along to the next part of the workflow. So that's really going to be your starting point. And then, whoops. Talking about how they work, there's 3 types of triggers that you're going to see. The main one you'll see is we just call it event. And that's just looking for either an event where something's created or updated in JobTread. And that's going to be the starting point for that type of trigger. We also have what we call general, where you can schedule workflows to run at a certain time, or that's where webhooks will be also. That's kind of a advanced feature for an already advanced feature that we rolled out. So I'm not going to touch on webhooks too much. And then the other type you'll see a little bit more often than general is going to be the reminder. And that's where you can set, based on a custom field changing or a date field changing, you can schedule a workflow to run around that date. So either a certain amount of time before or after. So from there, let's take a look at this example trigger. If we click on that output, it drops down this whole big list. I know it looks scary. I like to think of these as kind of like the library of data points that you can pull from this trigger. So when we get a document updated, we're going to get this whole list of values that get passed that we can use later on in the workflows. By no means do you need to know all or use all these for your workflow. Sometimes you might just use one or two things from this to build out the rest of your workflow. But the other thing I want to call out is just first, you'll see this document colon with some values. That's because this is a document updated trigger. So we're relating the data about this document. And then you'll see new value and old value. If you've ever used Zapier, that's going to be equivalent to the data next and data previous. And really all that's looking at is anytime you have something updated, obviously that means something changed, and it changed from an old value to a new value. So if you updated the status of a document, it would have an old value colon status and then new value colon status to show what the previous value was, what the new value is. So moving on from there, let's talk about actions. So your actions are going to be what follows up on your triggers. This is going to say, hey, we got the trigger, we got the data from that. Now, what do we want to do with it? So in this case, I've got the example where we are going to update the job. So in that case, in step one in the trigger, I took the document updated, and then now I want to update the job based on that. So going on to workflows now, how do we even get to them? So just to call out, this is going to be in your settings tab of JobTread. What that means is you're going to need full admin access to even get to the workflows. So if you don't have the settings tab when you go into JobTread, that means you don't have the permissions necessary. If you feel like you should have those permissions, that's a conversation for whoever the admin at your company is. But just note that, yes, they will need full admin access. So not just anybody can hop in and start, throwing workflows into your organization. So with that said, before I hop into our live demo, I want to take a pause there and see, did we have any questions?
We had a quiet, shy group today.
Okay,
Or
yeah,
everyone's already a subject matter expert. That could be the other solution. But yeah, feel free to jump in questions along the way. We'll find some natural stopping points as we go. And obviously right now, if you're hoping to troubleshoot your workflow, that's probably not the space for this, but we do have a think tank coming up in a little bit. So if you're looking for some additional inspiration or assistance, don't forget about our think tank. But no questions thus far, but don't be shy, folks. Dump them in the chat and we will be here to answer them for you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think seeing the workflow in action will clarify a lot of things as well. Just wanted to give the opportunity if someone had any questions, but awesome. We'll go along from there then. So hopping into my organization, I will we'll answer that question real quick. So workflows, you will need full admin access. And that's because this setting tab where you find workflows, they're not going to have access to this unless you have this full admin access turned on. So
Yeah,
just to
we're
answer
always
that.
open to feedback on that, Marcus, but I think we were also trying to put appropriate breaks in place because as you are going to soon see, there are some powerful things that you can automate. And so I think you'll find that having the breaks in place is good, but a fair call out, Marcus, and we're happy to take feedback as well.
Yeah. So with that said, I'm going to talk through so when you click, so if we go to settings, then we go to the workflows tab, and then I'll just mention these sections here. I'm actually going to delete this real quick because this one I'm going to recreate. I'm also going to delete this one. Should have done that first. That's my bad. So this section, you'll see your workflows. There is a limit of 10 at this time. But just keep in mind that within each one, you can have 100 of these boxes in here. And so, you can build out paths and stuff here. So really, you should only have one workflow with a certain trigger, because within that trigger, you can build out all these different paths to do different things. So I know there's this 10 limit, 10 workflow limit, and that seems maybe a little prohibitive to some people. But I would also just again like to emphasize that I would really recommend starting small here. Build out one or two of these, or as I'll show in a second, we can import from this library template that we created for y'all. But really, focus on those small wins first, really kind of see the impact and power of workflows before you just try to, just like hit that 10 max as fast as possible. The results should speak for themselves. And it's really, I think, more powerful to build meaningful ones out than just building them out just because you still have space. And then right below that, we've got the email error recipients. So this is just your list of if a workflow does run into an error, who it's going to email. And then right below that, you've got your workflow run history where you can just see and then sort by, certain ones as well. So with that said, let's click this plus workflow button. The first thing I want to call out is this import from file. So if you do want to share some of these workflows with, maybe you go in JobTread Pros and you feeling good about what you've done, you want to share it, you can click this into the workflow, and then we'll have an export button that's going to download this .json file. And basically all that is the code file that does what this workflow does. So if you want to give somebody that, you could click import from file, and then they're just going to upload that JSON file. With that said, I want to first go over importing from library. And apparently I need more memory on my computer. Sorry about that. Going over these workflow libraries. So we took feedback from the beta users, we took internal feedback and just feedback we've been hearing as, as we've evolved as a company, and said, hey, what are some quick wins that, and templates we can set up for our customers who maybe don't want to, go through the process of building these out themselves, and, just want to jump in and get some of these downloaded that they can either play with, or just, hey, this is exactly what I want. Let's start with that. So with that said, I'm going to click on this import task template when job is sold. So I'll click this import button, and then you'll see this warning from incoming custom field status. So I just need to match a custom field to that. And I've got this one called job status. So I'll match that, and then I can import. And then it's just going to import that. And if I click this open all button, I can take a little bit of a closer look. So from there, we can just see, okay, so I've got job updated, I've got this filter. Okay, then I'm finding a template, and then I'm importing that template. So if you don't feel super confident with your abilities to build out a workflow, don't worry about that. I would say you can either just implement these as they are, or you can say, okay, well, let's, pick a different template here that I can type in, and you can kind of tweak these for your specific processes. Or you can just learn on, I built all these as, for y'all to use, but certainly if you just want to use them as like, hey, how did he do this certain thing? That's a great way to just kind of learn more about workflows. So with that said, I want to now jump into building out a new workflow from scratch. So first, before I do this, I should define, okay, what are we going to do here? I like to start by describing what I'm going to do in plain English. So what I would do is, what I do, describe it first in plain English, and then I can kind of parse that out into these triggers and actions here. So with that said, I want to build a workflow for when a customer proposal gets approved. I want to update the job status custom field to approved also. So just to talk about that a little bit, let me open up this other tab. We can take a look at my job Kanban, job status Kanban. So let me take this job, throw it into estimating. So I've got this job called estimating. I think I deleted the document. I did not delete the documents. So let me just do that real quick. Apologize there. So I've got this new job I'm working on with no documents. It starts in the estimating status and then going back to our job pipeline here. What I want to happen is when I get a proposal that I send out to a customer, I want to create I want it to automatically go into this approved column so that, like I said in my example, I'm not spending every Friday afternoon going through all these jobs and making sure, they have the right criteria for each column they're in. So with that said, let's go back to my workflow. I said when a customer proposal gets approved, but if we scroll through here, we're not going to find that. And that's because we've tried to take these, we've abstracted them to the general case so that you can come in later and, filter it down for your specific need. So in that case, a customer proposal getting approved, well, really all that is just a document updated. And so if I scroll through here, I can find that document updated trigger. And then if I want to check, I can click this output and see these are all the fields that are going to get passed that I can use later on. So we can just close out. We don't need to look at those at the moment. What I can do here is click the plus button. And then now I'm ready to add in an action. And like I said, I want to update that job custom field. And what that abstracts to is just a job updated. So you've got your create section here for actions. You've got a find section. We've got the tools, and then we've got update here. So we can update our job. And then you'll see we've got all these boxes here. So this is going to be what we want to actually update. These ones without anything under it are just the default fields that you can update. And then these ones that say job custom field are just custom fields that I have that I've created. And so that's why they're here. But before I do that, we've got this field that says ID and it's got this asterisk that just everywhere else in JobTread as well. Anytime you see that red asterisk, that means it's a required field. And so I need to give it an ID. So if I want to give it an ID, first I'm going to say, okay, well, this is a update job action. So in the context of updating a job, I'm going to need the job ID. And so if I click on this, it's going to pull up all these values that line up with these outputs. And so what I can do, if I'm not really sure, I scroll through here, but I'm not really sure, there's a lot of things, I can actually just type in ID. And that's going to filter this down to all the possible ones that contain the letters ID. And looking through that, so one here means that I'm pulling it from this step one. I see that there's a job ID, and that's going to be exactly what I want there. Next, after that, I want to tell it, hey, what do you want to actually update on this? So like I said, my job status custom field, I want to click on that. And then it's a pick list, so it gives me all my options. And like I said, for this one, I want it to be when I want it to switch into job approved. And then the last thing I just want to call out here is this run as user. So what this is in general, it's going to be off by default. And that means that whenever this happens, you'll see in the history that JobTread did that action. So if I pull up my history tab here and I scroll down a little bit, I can see yesterday I have this job updated and that says it was run by JobTread. And that's my indication that it was a workflow that did this. So don't be surprised if you see JobTread in your history once you have workflows. The other thing, though, going back to that, is I can actually set it to run as a user, and I can pick one of the internal users from my organization. And just to note here, by selecting this, when this runs, it will run as Alex or Alexander. And what it will do is, even if he doesn't have permission to update the job normally, for the purpose of this workflow, it will override his permissions to carry this out. But just note that he's not going to be able to go in himself and update still. It's just for the purpose of this workflow, it'll override that permission. And there will be something in the history that shows, even if it's run by a user, there will be something in here that shows that it was done by a workflow. So just keep that in mind. You can't, send mean messages to your customers and then blame it on a workflow. That will show in the history. Not that anybody here would do that. So now that we've done this, we've actually built this out. And this is actually, let's go ahead and just good practice. Let's go ahead and give it a name. This is my JobTread 204 demo workflow. Always something to be descriptive so you can come back and easily troubleshoot. And then from there, we've actually have this full workflow, and I'd be good to set this live now. Just note that by default, every workflow you import or build out will be inactive, and that's to give you the chance to build it out. And then you can set it to active. Just note, we get this message here. Some actions can't be undone. There's no whoopsie button on this, but you can, if you need to, you can check the history and say, okay, this workflow updated the status. I can go back to that job and undo that. But if it updates, 100 different things, there's no button to undo that 100 actions. So just keep that in mind. These are powerful, but they're powerful, which is, it's with great power comes great responsibility, if you will. But before I continue, does anybody see what we might be missing on this workflow? Something that might need to be added before we continue on? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so just like I don't know if Tim's typing his message, but just like Tim's uncle at Thanksgiving, uh, as he
That's
likes to
right.
say.
No filter.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So no filter. So that's going to be super important here. Before I add that filter, let's go ahead and hop back to the slides real quick just to talk about that a little bit more in depth. So it's a drunk workflow. Exactly. Yeah, it's got no filter. It's just gonna run when it feels like it. Yeah. So talking about filters. So if you see the screenshot of the filter I have, hopefully it looks familiar. If you've done any filtering on custom views, we built it to look exactly like that pretty much because, if you've used filters before, we want to be building on that knowledge that you already have in JobTread. And just to talk about that, so um, in the case of your custom views, when you have a filter, you're filtering so only the results that meet the filter criteria come into that view. In the case of the workflow, we're checking these filter criteria so that only when we meet these criteria is when the workflow is actually going to continue. So data comes in, we check it against this list of criteria we've set in the filter. If we meet those criteria, we continue on with the workflow. If we don't, we stop right there, or we go on to check a different filter in another path. So with that said, let's go ahead and add our filter, because as it stands right now, this would means that anytime any document gets updated, whether that's a vendor bill, vendor order, customer invoice, bid request, whether it's any type of those documents, and any update that could be status, making a comment on it, anything like that, that would cause the job that document's on to go move into approved. So obviously that's not what we want. So we can click this plus button here. You'll see there's kind of one on either side here, but we don't have any path down here yet. This is just telling you if you want to add it, click this button. But so it doesn't matter which of these you click because we don't have a path. So scrolling down, we find our tools section where we have this filter. And then again, like I said, it should feel familiar if you've done any filtering in custom views. So we click on this, and now again, we pull these fields from step one. And what I said was, I want to, let me just go into this other tab real quick just to show this. So in general, you'll see these filters. So like, for instance, I want to filter on the name. So I see document full name and document name, and maybe you don't know the difference between those, and that's totally fine. What we can do is in this other tab, I'm going to go to my document section, click on settings, and I can go to fields here, and you'll see I've got full name and name. And keep in mind, this is in the context of documents. So you don't see the document colon full name, document colon name, but those are referencing the same thing because we're on this document section. And so looking at those, we can see that a document full name means the name of the document plus the job number and document number, whereas the name is just the document name. So I just want to use the document name and I want to make sure it contains proposal. Looking at my document templates real quick, I can see that I've got, all my customer orders here, change order, proposal selections. I want to make sure it's only when the name contains proposal. And I say contains here because that's going to be a little bit more of a open-ended case than is exactly. And the reason I want to do that is maybe in the future, so both of them would work in this case, but maybe in the future, I want to add a document called pool proposal or landscaping proposal or remodel proposal. The point being that all I care about is that the document contains the word proposal. So with that said, we can go back here. And like I said, we want to take the document name, not the full name. And then instead of it is exactly, let's check contains. And then this filter will be case sensitive. That question came up yesterday, so I just wanted to address that. It is going to be case sensitive, so that would be proposal. And then also the other thing I said was I care about, and I want this to happen when the status of the document changes. So when I'm interested, I need this to trigger when the status goes into approved. So I'm going to hit this and button because I also want to check for this criteria. And I'm going to type in status because I'm not sure which value to use yet, but I know it's going to be based on the status. So let's talk about the difference between document status and then new value status and old value status. So document status, when a document gets updated, it's going to have a status and it's whatever status is in at the time of that update. So if I were to update a document and it's approved, it's going to be in the status approved. In that case, if I update that document, if the update to that document it was I changed the status from pending to approved or the customer approved it, it's moving into that new value approved. The issue here though is when we go to document status. If I had an approved document and I added a comment on it, said, hey, team, check out this document, it's been approved. Well, that's statically in the status approved and the name contains proposal. So it would run this again just by me commenting on it, even though it's not switching status. So that's why in this case, I really care about when the new value becomes status. So it's switching into the status approved. And that's the difference there. So like I said, I want to approved, and I can even get more specific. Let's say I'm only interested in when the document goes from proposal to approved, because sometimes you might create a draft of a document and you just go ahead and approve it yourself. You're not even sending it to the customer. You just kind of want to bypass things. So this makes sure that if I do and then I check the status, the old value status, I want to make sure this is pending. So now this means only when the status of a document, so the document gets updated, and when the old status is pending and it moves into approved, that and the name of the document contains proposal, that's when we're going to pass this filter and move into job updated. So that way it only moves into this job updated exactly when I want it to. So filters, they're going to be super powerful, super important. And really what I like to say is that, the filters kind of make or break your workflow to ensure that they're only happening when you want them to, and that they're not happening when you don't want them to. So I know that was kind of a lot, but I want to talk about testing your workflow now. So like I said, all workflows will by default be inactive. So when you make them active, I would highly recommend that right away you go in and test it, before you kind of let this workflow just live on your org, so to say. It's really important to just test it, make sure it's working the way you want it. And so the way I'll do that is, excuse me, I have a job here. It's this test job. I created it specifically for the purpose to test. And what I want to do is first, I see the job status is estimating. And then what I'm going to do is once I create a proposal document, I'm going to set to pending, then I'm going to set to approved to imitate what would happen normally with the customer approving it. And so I'm going to do that. And then if my workflow works the way I'm expecting to, it's going to update estimating to approved without me touching this job status. So let's do that. So creating a document, create this proposal. I've got the budget on here. I'm going to go ahead and click create. And then from there, I'm going to set it as pending, like I said, and then I want to go ahead and approve it. So if this worked the way we think, we can go back here and we go to the dashboard, except we see, hey, job status is still in estimating. So what's going on there? Well, one thing I forgot to mention, or not forgot, but didn't bring up yet, is that this workflows, we put it on a 15-second delay. For one reason, that can give you the opportunity to stop the workflow if you need to, for whatever reason, but also just really the main reason is for performance purposes. Just that little bit of 15-second delay allows things to run a little bit more smoothly. And so if we go back to that job, we'll find that now it's approved and I didn't even touch it there. So like I said, that all looks good to me now. And if I go back and double check in my workflow, I will come down here and I can actually check, hey, this was, so it actually did 3 times. And if we dive into that a little bit, hey, why did that run 3 times? Well, it stopped due to the filter. And if we think about it, we created the document and then we updated it to pending. So that's a document updated, except the previous stage would have been draft, or the previous status rather would have been draft, and the data next or new value of the status would have been pending. So that's why this ran here, but then it stopped because it got to the filter and it didn't meet the criteria. Then once I set to approved, it actually went through, and that's what actually did the action there. So that's going to be how you want to test your workflows. Super important because you don't want to, release these onto your org, so to speak, without, testing, make sure they work properly. So going back to presentation real quick, a couple more things I want to touch on, and then I like to save, a good chunk of time at the end to answer questions. I think I've seen a couple come through, and I definitely want to address those. So just bear with me a little bit longer here and we'll get to those. So next I want to talk about paths. I do see the question came in, how many different actions or steps can be on a single workflow? And Tim answered that with 100. And that's each one of these blocks here counts as one of them, and you've got 100 total. And so one way you can really maximize the workflows you get is by adding paths. So what we did was this top row here actually kind of mimics the one we just built out, where documents updated, we have a filter. In my case, I had update job rather than update document, but very similar. But what happens if, I want to do some other workflow related to a document getting updated? Maybe in this case, I want to also set something up for, when I send out a bid request, maybe I want to create a comment to send to the team and say, hey, team, keep in mind the bid requests have been sent out. Keep a lookout for those. So these are all related to the same trigger of document updated, but I can do vastly different things with filters and paths here. So basically it would do the trigger would happen when a document's updated. Then we go to this first filter. We check, do we meet the criteria? If yes, we go on here. If no, we'll stop this path here and then go on to the next path where we check that filter. If yes, continue. If no, we just stop because there's not another path. So that's going to be how you can kind of utilize, really get the most use out of your workflows. But again, I wouldn't make that the goal to, try to hit that 100. We had to pick a limit somewhere, and that's really not, it's a limit. It's not a suggestion for how many actions to be on your workflow. Maybe you do hit that 100 and that's awesome, but just because you don't have 100 doesn't mean you're not, building out powerful workflows. So I like to just mention that. And then lastly, I just want to call out a couple of popular use cases here. I pulled this list kind of from to match that template library that we provide with for y'all. So we've got process automation. That's going to be things like what I was doing, updating a custom field, in my case, a job status. Create a job when a customer is created, assign access, send out communications. That's super powerful. You can, create automated kind of communications and follow-ups, and just things like that. Again, not meant to be an exhaustive list here, but more so just to get kind of get some ideas flowing. And then lastly, just want to mention some of these key reminders, as we just touched on here. 10 workflows per organization, 100 total steps per workflow. I saw a question, was that, is that going to be a hard limit? We are taking the philosophy of, we can always add more later, but you obviously can't pull a limit down. So we want to be conservative with that, set a 10 workflow limit. That's not to say it'll always be 10. That's just where we've set it for now. And we'll obviously, keep in mind the feedback, and we can, see how many workflows people are creating in their orgs. So that's something we'll be keeping an eye on. Again, I'd like to just mention that I don't think the maximum should be your target. I think the goal should be, build out powerful workflows that save you time, save you that effort, save you that double entry, things like that. So just keep that in mind. And then just some tips. I always like to harp on just the importance of filters. Like I said, I think that really can make or break a workflow. It can be the difference between a super powerful workflow and something that's just totally messing with your data. And then again, create that test job. Same thing we recommend when you're new to JobTread, create a test job, try things out. Same with workflows, create that test job, do the trigger, make sure you're meeting the filters or not meeting them to test that case as well. And then that'll ensure that your workflows are happening when they're supposed to. And then lastly, I just wanted to kind of touch on how I kind of mentioned it before. But the kind of parsing out that what I call plain English into a workflow, as I said before, English, you take that plain English, that's a great starting point. It makes sense to us hearing it, and then translating that into this trigger filter action that we set up for the workflow. So taking a look at this example, I want to add a schedule to remodel jobs when they are created. And so just the way English works sometimes, that's backwards from, how you set up the workflow. So with the workflow, obviously you want to start with the trigger, then filter, then action. So, if you want to say this sentence in a way that makes sense in line with the workflow order, you could say, when the remodel jobs are created, I want to add a schedule. And so that's just to point out, how you can kind of translate this. So with that said, I think that's all I've got for the presentation. So I see some questions flowing in.
Yeah, they're coming in fast and loose.
Yeah,
So
awesome. No, I'm glad to see that.
yeah, and I want to start kind of with the first questions and then kind of work our way down. And there's even a couple more that have been rolling in as we've been speaking. So let me start with kind of a scenario that James posted. And this one, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, might be a little trickier to automate as a workflow. So, James was talking about what happens if you get a call from a customer, they want a quote, and you want a job created based off that, and some kind of numbering system and sequence. So I think the actual job creation itself is not something that can be automated. And then the other follow-up to that, Sam, is can it send documents? Like, can I have something queued up to send like a work
Great.
order? Go ahead.
Great question. Yeah. So I will first mention, I probably should have mentioned this a little earlier. Some of y'all are familiar with Zapier. So when do I use Zapier? When do I use workflows? So workflows is great for these internal JobTread to JobTread things, workflows. We have integrations as well. So if you're integrated with one of these, when something happens here, you can, and we're working on building out more triggers and actions with these integrations we already have. They can currently be done with webhooks. And so with that said, something like you get a phone call from a client, if you wanted that to specifically be the trigger for this, that's something where I would recommend Zapier, because that phone call, that's something where if you integrate with like open phone or dial pad, you can use call received as the trigger for that, and then you can tie it into JobTread. Once you get onto that JobTread action, you can follow up with a workflow that takes whatever that action Zapier is, matches it with a trigger for a workflow in JobTread, and kind of goes from there. The other thing is there's a couple things we intentionally didn't add actions for. And so that includes, first of all, deleting things. So we didn't want the case where you can do something and now it's automating the process of deleting things. We, as you can imagine, and we are imagining, that could be kind of chaotic. And, you might wake up one day and say, hey, why, why are all these files or things missing? So we wanted to avoid that. Second is we don't have actions to automatically send out documents. The reason for that is because most of these documents are legally binding, and we felt that you should really, be able to be putting your eyes on those documents and reviewing them and sending them out yourself, just to avoid any possible issues with that. And then third, we don't have an action to create a document. The reason for that is there's a lot of context to creating documents. So if I come in here and I'm creating a proposal, so whether it highlights things or not depends on other documents you've created. And then, maybe you just want certain things, but not others. How do we contextualize that with, generalizing it to a workflow? Um, it's basically something that's very easily done in the interface here, but there's a lot of like nuance and things that's pulling from in the budget that make it not so straightforward to automate as an action. So that's the reason we didn't add those 3.
Mhm. Yeah, we had another question on that about kind of queuing up an invoice, and we love the idea. Like we understand the powerful like use case for that. Like it would be awesome, but to Sam's point, the legal risk that JobTread would be assuming would be also quite profound. And so we hope people understand the reason for limiting that. Moving on to some other questions that we got. So Eric had asked a question. I just want to confirm about using custom fields within workflows. So as an example, we want to send a past due invoice reminder after 7 days to some one-off customers, but not like their property management customers. So custom fields for sure, something that can be utilized in workflows. Correct, Sam?
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, that's going to kind of be your backbone of, things like, um, in that case, as a past due reminder, I actually have a workflow, invoice reminder if unpaid after 3 days. So I would certainly recommend like, import this, open it up, take a look at it, see what we're doing here. So, we've got this document reminder based on the issue date. You could either do due date or issue date. And then it says, 3 days after that at 9:30. And then filtering here, this is where you could have those custom fields. It's like, if you had a customer type, or like on the job custom field, like a customer type custom field saying like, single customer or property management company, that's where you could filter that and say, okay, this is, filtering out those property management, custom field, so that it's only sending to the people you want it to. And then all I'm doing here is just sending a reminder. So I would definitely play around with some of these templates. I think that can do a great job of getting you all started. But yeah, hopefully that answered that.
Yeah. Then Marcus had asked a really good question, going back to that history or audit report. And I believe I gave him the answer he was looking for. See, I'm not just a pretty face. Okay, arguably I'm not that either. But what Marcus was basically asking is, when you go to that history report and you, let's say, run the action as a user instead of as JobTread, how do we understand, was this task taken by a workflow, or was it just JobTread itself, or something else? And one of the gear, if you go to the gear icon, you can actually pull in workflows as one of those columns. So you'll be able to see whether it was run by a user, whether you left it as JobTread. Workflows is the name of that field, as Sam's showing you now. So for those of you who are interested in like auditing and saying, hey, why did we send this thing out? We can understand, oh yeah, that was the JobTread 204 workflow that we sent out, as an example.
Yeah. And so if I had switched out my name, like on the example, run as user, if I put myself in here and then, I'll just show it real quickly because I think it's, a good thing to show. If I go back here, I go to that document, let's just delete this again real quick and just do, let's delete that, delete this one. And then we go to the dashboard. Let's change it back to estimating. So I save that. If I go back, create the proposal, set it to pending, and then approved. I should see here nothing yet because it's on that 15-second delay. But if we, check our workflows, we can see it's queued. And then if we wait a couple seconds, we should see that one skip, this one finished. If I go to this job, it should say approved. And then if I go to the history, it's going to say Sam Levenger, but it's also going to show that it was run by a workflow. So again, just this is a little bit of a joke, but also not. Like if you customers or if you got user sends a mean message to a customer and said, well, hey, it was it was a workflow that did that got deleted or
Mhm.
something, you can go to your history and
Yeah.
say, well, hey, there's nothing in workflow here, so I know it was you who typed that. So just something to keep in mind. There's this, we do have the history here where you can see, whether it was a user or JobTread or workflow, all those things.
Careful, Sam. They might start blaming you. It was Sam Levenger at JobTread who sent that
I
mean
know, I
message.
know.
And then Johnny had asked a good question that I actually wanted to add some clarity to as well, Sam, is Johnny was asking, can you add to-dos in a workflow? And one of the nuances is in your catalog, you're going to see a schedule template tab and a to-do template tab. But in the workflow section, you're going to see just task template. But help me if I'm misunderstanding, Sam, right? You can still import a to-do template. You just need to use that find function to make sure we're grabbing the right kind of to-do template, right?
Correct. Yeah. So just peek behind the curtain. If y'all have been here for God, maybe over a year at this point, when we switched from, if you remember JobTread about a year ago, we didn't have schedule and to-dos, we just had tasks. And then we added to-dos. So we broke out schedule and to-dos rather than having one as a task column. In the background in JobTread, both schedules and to-dos are just two different types of tasks. So they're both tasks and therefore they're both task templates. So if we want to import a task template, we can do that. If I want to put it on a job, I can do that. Just give it the job ID, which we've got right here. And then it asks for this task template ID. So one of the great things we have in here. So just to note, there's no notion of a task template on this record here or this record even. So what we need to do is add another step. We scroll down to our find, and then we can actually find either a singular task or a task template where we can go for, you can do is to do, but I typically recommend name and then is exactly. And in this other tab, I'm just going to pull up my catalog. If I want a schedule template, I could say, here's the name of this schedule template. Let's put it in there. And then that's going to output this ID that I can use in this case here. So if we scroll down, we'll see the ID. Or if I want a to do, I go to my to do templates. I've got this really cool named one called testing, and I can copy that and I can put that name is testing, and it'll know that this is a to-do template versus a schedule template. But like I said, functionally, they're both task templates. They'll work the same. So that's how you
Right.
would find import a task template with the notion of is a schedule, is a to-do, things like
And
that.
that find template is really important, right? Because I think a lot of people like myself just assume, okay, I want to import a task template, so I'm going to grab import task template, and then I'm going to try to type the name in. But that find function is really crucial to all this, right, Sam?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's because we're, as you see here, it's asking for the template ID and not the template name. So if you were just to type in, if I type in, this is my to do template name testing. If I type that in here, it's going to say, hey, that's not an ID, give me an ID. So that's
Mhm.
why this is important here.
Gotcha. And then James asked, can this look like an input form? I had followed up with James just to make sure we were understanding the context. If I were to just guess at what James is referring to, I think, we have the web form, right, in our settings. And, you might want to try to leverage that web form or some kind of intake form with workflows. Is that possible, Sam?
Yeah, 100%. That's honestly a great use case. If you have a web form, I've got this one, just an example called new customer form on my website. If a customer were to fill this form out, what it does is I don't have create new job, but it does create a new customer. And what I can do is make a workflow, I mean, let's make a new one called create customer, uh, customer created. And so that web form, it's going to create the customer, and that happens because they fill out the web form, that automatically creates this customer. And so that's going to trigger this
Mm,
customer created. And now let's say I've got, every time a new customer gets created, well, maybe I import a task for my sales team. So, I could do that import task, where I first find that task. And maybe I've got one where the name is um, sales to dos. So now if I had this template called sales to dos, somebody submits a web form, and then that would automatically generate that customer, which would then trigger this workflow, which can then import this task template called sales to do. So
right.
not that this is the only thing you can do to follow up on that, but that's kind of how you can integrate a web form that you have into workflows.
Yeah, and I think to James's earlier point, like I think his use case is really powerful. Like, hey, I want to be able to fire out a budget and this and that. But what we had already spoke about is just candidly the legal risk of with the documentation and the budgeting. We didn't want to necessarily assume that. So even though we understand how powerful that would be, it just is just kind of risky. So never say never, but just not right now. Moving right along, Richie had asked earlier, are you able to close out a job based on a declined proposal? And that one should be pretty doable, right, Sam?
Yeah, 100%. So going back to ours here in our update job, I can turn off this status, and I can click closed on. And then just a little fun thing, if you switch from static to dynamic, you can actually just do today. And that's a dynamic field. So today, not meaning it's always going to pick September 26, 2025, but it's going to pick whatever today's date is as the close date. And then in that case, you could filter on, so document name contains proposal and new status is declined. I can get rid of this. And now anytime I've got a document with the name proposal and it switches into the value declined, I'm just go ahead and close that job. That's it.
Yeah, good stuff. And then Cydrus, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I apologize. I'd asked earlier, is it possible to show if an invoice is created prior to the actual date of sending that out to a customer? Now, I think this might go back, Sam, to the workflows can't necessarily create a document, right? But
Right.
maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Yeah. It's possible to show if an invoice created prior. So, I mean, technically, all of your invoices are, well, okay, prior to the date of sending. In this case, I wouldn't really say that's probably a workflow use case, more of like checking here. Here was
Mm,
if I need the created on date, I can see that it was created
right,
today. And then, when was it sent to the customer? I can check that as well. And then obviously I've got the history log where I can check, the status where it went from draft to pending when I sent it. So it's not
right.
necessarily a workflow in the way it was described here, but more of just like kind of checking on that data.
Yeah, definitely the documents tab will be your best friend. I think for a lot of those document reportings, play with some of the columns and the filters. This isn't just like a static view. If you want to jump into the customer invoice section and all that, there's a lot of different fields and columns you can pull in for reporting, not necessarily workflow reporting, but reporting on invoices. And then Eric had asked, and I guess this one would be good for you because Sam, you made the library, right? Will the library be updated or added to on a regular basis?
Um, I'm not sure on maybe a regular basis, but I'm sure if we see, kind of just wait on the feedback and just check on some of the use cases there. We tried to take some of that feedback to generate what we thought is a good starting point, but certainly like if some of these come up pretty regularly, hey, how do I do this? If I see those often enough, I'm
Mhm.
certainly happy to. I've got a separate org where I go and create those, and those get pushed to the library. So if I see some common ones come up, I'm certainly happy to add those and keep that updated for
Yeah.
y'all.
If you bug Sam enough, he'll have to do it. So just keep emailing him. But also one of the problems I'm sure Sam is because of the flexibility or the custom aspect of it, it would be difficult to create a gigantic library because so many of these workflows are going to be tied to custom fields, which are unique to individual users' accounts. And so we
Yeah.
trying to create some high level libraries, like we wanted to give people that power and that access early on to give you something to play with, but we understand there's going to be a lot of flexibility, and so it's hard to account for every use case, right? So
Yeah, I tried to give, some more general ones, but once you start getting down into, I wanted to kind of stay away from like super specific cases here, but certainly as workflows kind of as we go on here and see more of how it's being used, I'm happy to add more to the library.
gotcha. And then another one about non-admin users and workflows. Marcus is asking kind of what's that non-admin's visibility to workflows? Will they even be able to know like what workflows have been created? Would they be able to turn them on? Do they have any visibility with workflows at all, or is it just the full admin users?
So just full admin users are gonna have access. I would say if you've got a not admin who's interested in exploring it, definitely check out on our help desk. We've got um, workflows overview. We've got and I tried helping as much as possible on these articles. Anna took them over the finish line, but we've got I think 5 to start here. Overview, getting started. This one has the video that Anna created, templates, testing, troubleshooting, and also this recording of me and Tim doing the 204 presentation will get edited soon and then posted onto the recorded trainings. So they'll have access to the help desk, so these articles and the video. So I would tell them to start there, and they can kind of get more familiarized. And then if you feel that um, they should be using workflows, you can give them that access, or you can have them sit with you on your account and kind of work through that.
Cool. And then I think the last question we have is from Bradley, and one that I have as well. So Bradley's asking, do you have a list of the available dynamic word or those input options? Because I think like me,
Yeah.
you like, oh, can I write today, or is that not going to take that? We're just kind of curious how that functions.
100%. So I will say we've got this article called Functions. If you've done formulas in the sorry, I'm blanking. If you've done formulas in like the budget or things like that, you would have seen this list. I don't yet have the dynamic word options like today. I think today and now are the only two as far as like the date time ones. So like if you're setting up something with based on timing, start date, you could either do today or you could do now, or you could do today plus 1 day. That would mean it would start to 1 day after today when this triggers. Um, Things like that. So it's really just today, now, and then adding a plus or minus, day, second, minute, hour. I think you can do week and year also, but that probably won't come up as much. But
Mhm.
we do intend to update that article to have those.
Yeah, no, awesome question. I had the same one, Bradley. So good stuff. Well, with no other questions rolling in, I know we're already 5 minutes over, so I don't want to hold anybody hostage. I did just want to end with this. Speaking of additional resources, we are going to have a think tank in, I guess, a little under an hour now. So if you did not get your fill of workflows, please join us for that. That's on the live training calendar again in just under an hour. And speaking of workflow help and assistance, at JobTread Connect in January, we will have an automation lab. That's a part of it. January 14th through the 16th. We would love to see you there. And if you buy your ticket now before October 3rd, you do save $100. So definitely recommend taking advantage of that now if you don't already have your ticket or aren't registered. And just to be transparent with pricing, that is $699 per person. So please, please take advantage of that savings right now. And we're not trying to bake into a bunch of hidden margin in this ticket price, right? Like we basically break even on this event because we want to see all of you and we want to help you. We want to make sure that your business has a platform. We want to, connect with you, help you with some of these automations. So I know I'll be there. Sam, I assume you'll be there. We all want to be there for you guys. So thanks again for all your help. When yeah, we'll hope to see you at the think tank as well if you have the time. But if not, you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon.
Thank y'all. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.